Hi, this video is going to be about D203, which is anatomy and physiology. I just barely passed this class today, and while it was on my mind, I wanted to get right to it before I forgot. But this was a not terribly difficult class. It's pretty straightforward. You don't need to find a whole lot of outside material. The main suggestions that I make is there is a study guide. A lot of people online were talking about that it would work good, and so that's basically all I did was the study guide and the videos that I suggest on the study guide. And I also use ChatGPT on the things that didn't show up in the study guide or the videos. I mean, that didn't show up in the videos on the study guide, or things that I needed a little bit more clarification on. And it seemed to work well. I wasn't, extraordinary in any of the categories, but I was in the good, 90-ish% on each of the categories. So that was, for the amount of studying that I did, it was a pretty good result. As for the main things that are covered in the class, like I said, if you just follow the study guide, it'll teach you basically everything you need to know. What I got a lot of on the test was, obviously with anatomy and physiology, they're going to ask you a lot about the different names of the different body parts. I got a few questions about the bones and what the inside of the bone is, what the outside of the bone is, mainly for the skeletal system. And then it asked me to name an example of a irregular bone. And so there was a bunch of different options, but you just had to pick the correct one. So I would go into the skeletal system and know a few different examples of those bones, the bone types, which are long, short, flat, irregular, and sesamoid. I didn't get any questions about sesamoid, but I think my question was mostly the irregular. But I would make sure that I would know the names of the few major examples of those different types. You don't necessarily need to know all of the bones in the body and all of their types, but I would say just a few for each. And then I didn't get any questions about being immovable or partially movable. So yeah, nothing there. Muscular system, they did have a lot of questions on the muscular system, the different tissue types. There are obviously the different types of muscles are the skeletal muscle, the cardiac muscle, and the smooth muscle. Yeah. And the skeletal muscle is your biceps. The cardiac tissue muscle is your heart. And the smooth muscle is things like your intestines or something, where it's moving things along. And so it did have quite a few questions about those. It had questions about how your skeletal system and muscular system work together, and a few other questions that were kind of similar with the other systems and how they interact with each other and help each other. Obviously, the cardiovascular system brings nutrients to the lungs provide oxygen to put in the blood to put to the rest of the body. How do all of these systems interact with each other? Yeah, I think that was mostly it for the muscular system. The nervous system, there was a few questions about the nervous system. Mostly it was how does the sensory inputs go to the central nervous system versus the central nervous system going to what's it called? It's the like motor nerves. So sensory nerves going to the central nervous system, or motor nerves going from the central nervous system to the muscles. And I didn't get any questions about mixed nerves. But yeah, there was a few questions on different parts of the brain and what they're called. I'm pretty sure I got one that was on where like the pons and the medulla are. There was a question that had to do with those parts. I'm not sure which part it was asking. It was either the pons or the medulla or around that area. It wasn't the cerebellum though. I did get questions on the different glial cells. Before the test, I had to come up with elaborate explanations of why the word goes with the function, and I always just do the front part. So the oligodendrocytes, they had a few questions with that, either being one of the possible answers or asking what it was. And I just had to remember oligo. It looks like it's a ball that spins and goes, and so I just tried to remember that. And what does it do while it's going? It's planting and fixing the myelin sheath, so just things like that. And I used there was satellite cells was in there for answers, and astrocytes was one of the answers. It wasn't the right answer, but it was one of the possible answers. So knowing what these are, for me, there was maybe one question asking what is one of these things, but a lot of questions had them as a possible answer. And if you know what these are, then you can rule them out pretty quick. So it helps you in the rest of the test. Obviously, not all these tests are going to be the same, but if you get mine, that's how it was. There wasn't really a ton of questions about forebrain, midbrain, and hindbrain, but knowing where the different parts of the brain are and what their kind of functions are did help on a few questions, especially the midbrain, where the midbrain helps with hearing and sight and stuff, and that kind of goes along with a lot of the later parts of the course material. Yeah, it's good to know. So the sensory nerves and stuff, we talked about that. Action potential, I think there was a little bit about that on the test, not a ton. Respiratory system, there's a lot of questions on the respiratory system, especially the different parts and what their functions are. So like the larynx, the pharynx, all of those two, they talked about a lot, probably because they sound pretty similar, so it's an easy thing to test on. So all those parts and what they do is important to know. And I can't remember the name off the top of my head, but it starts with an N, and it's part of the lungs. Knowing how the oxygen and how it moves into the bloodstream. Like I said, I can't remember off the top of my head, but if I saw it, I'd be able to point it out. But it starts with an N, and it helps out with that. But cardiovascular system, there's a lot of questions about the cardiovascular system. Knowing inhalation and the roles of the diaphragm and exhalation is very important. They talk about that a lot. Cardiovascular system, I'd say probably the majority of my, well, not the majority, but a high, number of questions were about the cardiovascular system. The picture that they used on the study material is not very helpful when trying to understand the direction of the blood flow. It is the picture that they used on the test though, so I would make sure that I would know exactly from this picture where those valves are and what those valves are called. Because the way I did it was I learned from a different picture that made more sense for where the blood flows, to memorize that. And I was kind of like, this picture sucks, I'm not going to use it. And then they ended up using that one exact picture on the test. So it kind of screwed me up, and I had to sit there for a minute and use my picture that I memorized for blood flow. And I knew where like the bicuspid some or other valve was versus the tricuspid, but I didn't know the aortic or the pulmonary. And so I had to do my blood flow, draw my blood flow picture, and look at the valve picture on the screen and try to orient my mind to be like, where would this be from the picture that I know? And that kind of sucked. So I would just suggest memorizing this picture and where these valves are, and also using a different picture on like Google for blood flow. It's a lot easier to memorize on a different picture. But the other thing for the cardiovascular system that's easier to remember, choose the right. It always goes through the right side first, and it comes in to the right side, and it always goes A and then V. It always goes from A to V. So there's the ventricle and there is the atrium. So right first, so it goes through, goes to the atrium, the right atrium. Then it goes through a valve. It always goes through a valve, and then that it goes to the right ventricle. And in between there is the tricuspid. And I always remember tri and bi. And tri is first. Then it gets pulled out. The blood gets pulled out from the V to through the valve, because it always goes through a valve. The pulmonary valve, the P, pulmonary valve, gets pulled through to the lungs, through the arteries, because arteries always go out, and then comes back through the pulmonary veins, because veins always come back to the heart. And then once it comes through and gets pulled back to the heart through the pulmonary veins, it goes to the left side. So it goes to the left top, which is A, so left atrium. Then it goes through the valve, and because the tri was over here, we have the bi over here. So this is the bicuspid valve or something like that. And it goes to, since it's not in the A, it goes down through the bi, goes to the V, which is, and it's not the right side because we already went to the right. It's the left side, the ventricle. Then after it goes through there, it goes through another valve, right? Obviously. And this one is, I don't have anything to remember. It's just the aortic valve. And it goes to the aorta. And the aorta is big. And so that's why on this picture that they give you on the study guide, the biggest one is the aorta. And it's actually labeled A, so A for aorta. But I didn't have that memorized before the test. It would have been nice to have on the test. So hopefully that made sense. That's what I used to remember it is, just to go through A, tri, V, valve, get pull, and then pull vein, and then left, so left A, then bi, then left V, then the aortic and the aorta. So hopefully that helps. For taking the test, I wasn't focused on remembering the whole word, because it's easier to remember, chunking, short little things is easier to remember than these long words. And so that's what I used to remember it. There's a lot of questions on it. If for example, it was one of mine was like, what valve is between the right V and the right A, right ventricle and right atrium? And I had to go through and be like, that's the opposite order, try to throw me off. But I wrote my thing, here's the right A, here's the right B, here's the left A, here's the left B, and I know in between the right A and the right V is the try, so then I can click that. So hopefully that makes sense. Go find your own Google image of the heart and the way the blood flows, and it'll make a lot more sense to you, and memorize it yourself. Yeah. It talks about red blood cells and white blood cells and what is inside of blood. I had a question on that. And they phrased it really weird, the question. And it asked about, what contains oxygen in the blood. But the way they phrased it almost made it sound like what delivers oxygen to the blood. But the answers weren't anything that delivers the blood to the oxygen to the blood, but they did have red blood cells in there, so that's what I ended up choosing. I'm still not sure if that was the correct answer or not, but that's something I would look into is the different parts of the blood. Obviously there's white blood cells, red blood cells, and plasma, but I would also go and look up the specific I don't know if you'd necessarily call it just the small part of the organ that puts the oxygen into the blood too, and to know that just in case you get that same question. Yeah. Blood pressure, that was another question. Make sure you know what blood pressure is. Diastole and systole. I always thought of diastole as in like diaphragm, and I don't really know why that helped me to remember that it's the relaxation and not the contraction, but systole is the contraction and diastole is the relaxation. You can try to figure out your own ways to remember that. Mine kind of is weird. The digestive system talked a lot about the different parts. What is the pharynx? What is the, small intestine? What do they do? Or what is the gallbladder considered? What does the gallbladder do? All that kind of stuff is really necessary for passing the test. Knowing what is considered the upper GI tract and what is considered the lower GI tract is important to know. Also, knowing, what was it? There's a part where it was it's a classification, and there's certain, I think it's just called the GI. I think it's just the GI tract is open. Oh yeah, GI is hollow, and the accessory organs. That's really important to know. Are the ones that are not open, but they also carry food, or they hold something, or have enzymes, or all sorts of different things. But it's important to know the difference between GI and accessory. I pronounced it wrong, but it's peristalsis and segmentation. There's a question on this. It's important to know. Peristalsis, is when the movement of the muscle where it kind of waves and moves things along. And the segmentation is when it kind of shakes it and is trying to break it down more. So that's important to know. And like I said, knowing the function of the lower GI tract. Urinary system. I think for the urinary system, there's the 4 different parts. The kidneys, the ureter, the bladder, and urethra. It's important to know those, but I think the most important part is knowing what the kidneys do and how it does it, and the process from beginning to end. There's quite a few questions about the kidneys. There's a crash course video that's great. The study guide has links to all those, and they'll help you out. Immune system, a lot of T-cell questions, antigen, antibody, pathogen questions. There's one question in particular that I struggled with. That was, give me an example of a pathogen, and it had a few different options. And one of them was obviously not a pathogen, because like I said, some of these answers come from other systems, just words that you might not know, vocabulary you might not know, and I knew that one, so I was able to cross that one off. But the rest of them, I wasn't sure about, so I would go over some main pathogens and antigens and antibodies, just like so you can and memorize them, so that if you get this question, you're not fazed by it. What else? There's a few questions about the lymphatic duct, like lymph in general, but nothing crazy. There was a lot of questions about T cells and knowing what those are. And the neutrophils and macrophages was on the test. And knowing what they do. Oh, and the other thing, the innate versus adaptive. Adaptive is the slower part of the immune system. The innate is the fast part. The innate isn't as doesn't do as good of a job. The adaptive does a pretty good job, and it also remembers the different pathogens or antigens, and so it works a little bit better. Anyways, those are important to know. The skin, knowing the different parts of the skin, basically knowing the study guide on this one will be good enough. But knowing the dermis versus the epidermis, they talk a lot about melanin and melanocytes and keratinocytes. So know those. Oh, and there's this, they call it some weird name, but it's basically just oil. But it's the sebum is the substance secreted into the hair follicles. So that's important to know. There's a question on that. The other parts, there was knowing the cochlea is important. I just remembered it because there's like this famous concert called Coachella or something, I think. But yeah, ear, song, music, put that together. There's another part there's this part of the ear that's not on the study guide, and I can't remember off the top of my head, but if I saw it, I'd be able to tell you. But it's one of the tubes or something, and it's not the cochlea, it's something else, and it's not in the study guide. And there was questions about this, so remember though to look that up. Yeah. There was a lot of questions on hormones, especially the aldosterone and where it's made. I don't know why they were obsessed with that one in the pre-assessment and the assessment, but to each their own. Knowing the different glands and being able to label them is important. You never know which one they're gonna have you do. Mine was pretty easy because it was just the testes, but there's obviously those ones that are in the brain that are pretty close and look pretty similar, and if you don't get my test, then it could be any of those more complex ones. Insulin is a good one, but if you just do the study guide, it should be all right. The other thing that they did talk about was the male reproductive structures, being able to label all the different parts and know the cycle from start to end. And same with the female reproductive structures, being able to label all of the different parts and be able to know what the cycle, what day is ovulation, etc. And there was a question on the pre-test that was also on my test that was about the corpus luteum or whatever. But basically, when the egg's not fertilized, what happens? There was a question on that. There was a question on the male reproductive structures that wasn't on the study guide, and it had to do. It basically, I don't know what it was, but it was, what does this do? And one of the options was keeping the homeostasis of the temperature for the testes, and so if it's too hot or too cold, and there's a few other answers, and I'm not sure which one it was, but I would look into that and what causes for the temperature, mainly temperature. See what's up with that. But besides that, I can't really think of anything off the top of my head. I did it just barely, and I tried to do this video right away so I would have it fresh on my mind. A lot of vocabulary to cover. The test was very similar to the pre-test, but a lot of questions that were very similar, but on different parts of the different structures. Instead of the same questions as the pre-test, it'd be like, instead of the skeletal system in the bone, the pre-test asks about 80% of the bone is made out of the more hard bone, and my test talked about instead of the 80%, it's the 20%. What is the 10%, the inside part of it made out of? And so there's going to be questions like that with the practice test versus the objective assessment, and so you'll need to generally know all of the systems and how they work together, and how they work within the system from start to end. And if you just do that with most of the systems, or all of the systems, but and then how they work together, you'll be good. But I think if I were to give just the last remarks, if you're going to do anything, finish the study guide, take the pre-test with your own knowledge after you do the study guide, and watch those crash course videos that are linked on the study guide, and then not in that order. So study guide, videos while you're doing the study guide, pre-test, and then obviously anything that you didn't know on the pre-test, go back and finish studying for those. But all in all, I did not do a crazy amount of studying. I just did it enough to like I said, know the different systems, and get all of the study guide done. What I like to do is right before the test, just do like an hour of review, and then start the test, and so everything's fresh in your mind while you're taking it. And then it worked out for me, and I'm sure it would work out for you too. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions, go ahead and leave them in the comments. I tried to get to them, but YouTube's not my life. Hopefully this will help you guys out. I'm not sure how many other videos have been made on this class, but yeah. Have a good day. Bye.